right, so let's start talking about the files and folders that Create React App has created for us in our project. We'll start with the top level files and folders, and then in the next lesson, we'll talk about the public and source directories. So of course, we begin with node modules, and this is where all of our project dependencies are stored. So this is where we can find things like React. And the reason we see so many dependencies listed, of course, is because React has its own NPM dependencies, and that relationship continues many levels down. So React may require package A, and then package A may require package B, and package B may require package C. As you may recall from when we created our project in our terminal, there were something like 1,400 NPM packages that Create React App had to fetch, and this is where they are all downloaded and stored. Of course, it's not important for us to understand what any or all of these packages do, but we do need them in order to run our project. So if I scroll down a little bit here to the R section, we will find React eventually. I'm going to scroll down here just to prove this to you, and here is React. All right. Now, as far as how you utilize node modules, typically it's not a good idea to write any source code in here. Node modules is other people's code. It's other dependencies that we have fetched from the NPM registry. Sometimes you might make small edits in here, like adding a console log, just if you want to make sure that your code that is utilizing node modules or a given library is running through that code. But typically you're not going to be doing anything in here. It doesn't belong to you. It's not your project's code, right? And for that reason, we typically do not commit the node modules folder to source control. The standard protocol is when another developer downloads your project, they're going to run npm install, and that command will fetch all the dependencies and create a node modules directory on their computer. And they're going to refetch all of those dependencies from the npm registry. So we typically do not add this to source control, but we do need it for our project to run. Next up, we have our git ignore file. This is a file generated by Create React App to tell Git which files and folders to ignore, which means to exclude from source control. So immediately here, you can see that we are never going to commit node modules to our Git history. And we have a whole bunch of other files and folders here. Some of them are related to things like our operating system. For example, dsstore is a automatic hidden file that is generated on Mac OS systems. The coverage folder is based on when you run a test suite. It's going to generate a folder with a bunch of files that tell you which parts of your code have been covered by tests and which parts have not. That's not really important to include in your source control because it's not the core code that makes up your application and gives it to the end user. So you can feel free to add things in here, but Create React App has chosen a reasonable set of defaults for us to ignore here. All right, moving on, at the very bottom here, we have this Readme MD file. MD is short for Markdown, and this is sort of your central starting documentation file. This is actually the file that GitHub is going to display when you land on a repository on GitHub. So here it's utilizing the Markdown formatting language to just write things like headers and lists and paragraphs. This is the best place in our project to leave notes for yourself. So as you're following along, if you're looking for some place to just write what you've learned, this is the best place to do it. It's literally a file just for note-taking, just for documentation. And you can see that Create React App has generated a reasonable starter file. So it will tell us, for example, how to launch the project and how to start our test suite. But you can feel free to delete this content or add on to this content. It's really just a text file at the end of the day for our notes. All right. Then we have two more files left at the top level, package.json and package.lock.json. They're kind of related to each other. Package.json is kind of the central metadata file for any Node application, not just React applications, but any Node application at all. React is fundamentally running on the Node runtime environment. So as a Node project, it will have a package.json file. And we're going to have a lot of metadata here, such as the name of the project, our version number, whether it's private, which means whether it's going to be listed on the NPM registry or not, things like the copyright, things like who owns the copyright, the maintainers. Those pieces of metadata are going to be located here. We're also going to have this dependencies key, which is going to list all of the NPM libraries that this project needs to run. So you can see here we do have React listed. And what this syntax on the right is saying is any version that is equal to or any minor version greater than 18.2.0. So what this little caret means is the minor version can go up, but the major version cannot go up. So for example, 18.2 would satisfy this requirement, but so would 18.3 or 18.4. The minor version refers to the second number here. It's the major version is the first number, the second number is the minor version, and the third number is the patch version. And typically when a library updates its major version, which is the first number, the developers say in that situation there may be breaking changes, and thus you have to be very careful. And this is not just true for React, it's true for generally most libraries being built today. They follow that protocol. So a library like 19.0 may have breaking changes, and you have to be careful updating to that. But a library version like 18.3 in this case is likely not to break anything because it is a minor version upgrade rather than a major version upgrade. And this caret simply says any version of 18.2 or greater as long as it is not a major version bump. So 18.2, 18.3, 18.4 will suffice in this situation. And when a user runs npm install, it's going to use these version numbers to determine exactly what version number to download. And this is directly related to our package.lock.json file. The package.lock.json file is very similar, but it's a little bit more explicit and concrete as far as if we look at specific dependencies here, it's going to tell us the exact URL location where it's going to get that npm package. It's going to have this integrity SHA, which is basically just verifying that it's the exact version number of that library at the exact same location. So if multiple developers try to download this project and run npm install, they're going to get the exact same version number across different computers. We don't really have to worry about this. It's all just dependency tracking and management. You will commit both package.json and package.lock.json to your Git source control in a typical project, but you're never going to worry about package.lock.json. This file is automatically going to be updated over time as you add more dependencies, and you just have to keep adding the changes to source control. Generally, you don't have to worry about the stuff in here. It's just related to the dependencies that are listed in package.json. Moving on, we have this script section, and this section is important because it defines the available command line commands that we can run in this project folder. So you may recall in the previous lesson, we ran npm run start, and the reason that start is available as a command in this folder is because we have a script called start. So the keys in this object represent the commands that we can run after npm run. So for example, we have 4 commands here, which means we can run npm run start, npm run build, npm run test, and npm run eject. And that is going to be the command from the terminal, from the command line. And then the value for that given key or command is the more in-depth command that is going to run. You can almost think of this as the shortcut or the alias that's going to run a more complex command on the right. And what typically that will be is some reference to an available npm dependency in our node modules folder. So what the npm run start command will do, for example, is talk to the React scripts library and ask it to run its start command. And React scripts is an actual npm library in our project. You can see it right here. So a lot of these npm commands are basically just delegating or proxying commands to the underlying React scripts library, which is taking care of a lot of that complexity. That goes back again to our kind of design principles of Create React App, in that it is abstracting away or hiding away a lot of this complexity of starting, for example, a React server or building a production build away from you. We just know that we can run npm run start and React scripts will take care of the rest, right? So this is sort of our entry point for more complex operations that are handled under the hood by Create React App. You'll notice this eject command. What this eject command will do is it's actually going to unplug or decouple you from Create React App, and it's going to show you the actual configuration files such as Webpack and Babel that have been created for you. So if you want more nuanced control over your configuration settings, you can run npm run eject. Generally speaking, though, that's not a good idea because it breaks you away from Create React App. And once you eject, there's no way to get back to this state right here where all of that hidden complexity is hidden away from you. And typically the Create React App maintainers will try their best to have a reasonable configuration for Create React App that handles modern use cases. So if there's something really custom in your app, that is demanding a custom configuration where you need access to the underlying Webpack files, Babel files, etc., you can then eject your app and to have access to that and edit it. But you typically don't want to do that until it's absolutely necessary. And we won't be doing that in this course because the Create React App configuration will be good for all of our projects and all of our needs. All right, moving on down here, we have an ESLint config object, and this is setting up ESLint, which is a linter. A linter is just a software program that checks for violations or errors in our code. A very simple example of a inefficiency violation is if we import a library into a file, but we never use it, that's wasteful, and that creates a larger bundle, which means a slower load time for the end user. So ESLint is just a thing that's going to check your code for violations like that and point it out to you in VS Code. And this is just configuring how that's going to run. We're going to have a more detailed explanation of these settings and these rules later on as we talk through them, but this is just that configuration section of package.json. And finally, we have browsers list. At a very high level, this is just determining the build step and how many browsers the final outputted JS bundle is going to support. So remember, we are going to have access to a lot of modern JavaScript features in our code here, and all of those JavaScript features aren't necessarily supported in browsers, for example, from 5 years ago. And those are still browsers that our end users may be using. So this setting kind of configures how far back we want to go so that when Babel and Webpack create our final JavaScript bundle, they'll need to provide compatibility with browsers. And this is where we tell it how far back we want to go. Do we want to go back to browsers that were, popular 5 years ago? Do we want to cover things like just the last 1 Chrome version or the last 5 Chrome versions, the last 10 Chrome versions? Do we want to cover browsers that are greater than 0.2% market share, right? You can get as granular as you want as far as the criteria by which you're going to determine which browsers you're going to support, right? And this is for both production and in development mode. So obviously in development mode, since we're developing our app on the latest version of Chrome in our browser, we don't really need to have support in development for a Chrome version from 2 years ago, right? But in production, you may want that because your users for your website may be using old, outdated browsers, right? And this is just determining those kinds of settings. We really don't have to worry about it in this course. Once you're working on a real-life production app, you'll have to look at your users and figure out what's best for your team, and then you can dive more into the browsers list library. But in here, the Create React App team just gives you a bunch of reasonable defaults. All right, so that covers kind of the top level files and settings and configurations that Create React App covered for us. The real heart of the project, though, lies in the public directory and even the source directory. This is where we're going to be writing most of our code. So in the next lesson, we'll talk about what these files in public and source represent. I do realize we're getting kind of really technical and lower level here, and I really do want to get to the actual writing of React and JSX and all those concepts just like you do, but I think it's important to understand all of these kind of moving pieces under the hood, not so low level, but at least within our project so that we understand how they all fit together. I promise that this will prove beneficial later on when we start talking about React specific concepts. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.